acknowledge the murder of Rachel Good in Minneapolis and the larger issue brought to light about ICE's misconduct and lawlessness and discrimination really nationwide, and we felt this acutely over the summer here in Los Angeles. Many of us, I also want to highlight that part of the reason that we know about what happened in Minneapolis is because of the courage of the folks who were in the vicinity of Rachel Good before she was murdered, who took out their phones and documented what happened. But for that video, we would only have the official version of events, which, as you've heard from our vice president, is literally flies in the face of what we know to be true from our own lying eyes. And so the importance of documenting human rights violations and shining light on injustice couldn't be more relevant than it is kind of in this moment, and that's why this film is particularly timely. I also want to acknowledge the it's not just domestic lawlessness that we're living through, and we'll talk a little bit about this perhaps as well. Last weekend, our government kidnapped a foreign leader, and in violation of both the U.S. Constitution and the sovereignty of international law. This attack came without congressional approval, without a UN Security Council resolution authorizing it, without any articulable threat to our nation. So it's really a challenging moment that we are in right now, in a moment where the courage of storytellers and documentarians and those who would shine a light on injustice is really as vital as it's ever been. So when our government engages in misconduct and lawlessness, and as the film describes it beautifully, a cycle of impunity, it's fearless journalists like Seymour Hersh who are essential actors in holding the government to account by bringing the truth to light. So I'm particularly grateful to be here with all of you and with Mark to talk about this outstanding film. Before we jump into the questions, Mark, just as background, the project seems really timely, and obviously you've been working on it for some time. What made Seymour a subject that it was in your mind kind of worthy of a film of this type? I know you've been trying to make this movie for a while, but what drew you to Seymour as a subject?
Wow. Well, I have to give a little bit of background. I met Seymour in 1985 while I was asked to meet him by the executive producer of a series on PBS, which is still there and hopefully will survive, Frontline. And it was a gentleman named David Fanning. And he said, why don't you go meet Seymour and see if there's something you could do with him. Maybe you want to make a film with him. And that was really about it. And I went and met him, and I just was very captivated by him. And you see pictures of his office in this. It was, in 1885, just as chaotic as it is today. And it was fascinating. And he and I just agreed, let's see what we could do. And at that point, I was doing verite, shooting my own films. And so I just followed him for a couple of months on a story that eventually was the basis of a New York Times story, and then also a film that I made called Buying the Bomb, which I happen to think is a terrific film, modestly. And some excerpts of it are throughout this whole film. You see Cy running around reporting. What got me was his extraordinary energy and commitment to following a story. He is. I can't compare him with everybody in the world, but certainly one of the most energetic, committed, dogged reporters imaginable, and seemingly with no limit to his energy. And I just was fascinated. And of course, in the case of that film, we got to a truth and exposed a crime. And I thought, well, this is something I want to be part of and something I want to see, and that we remained friends for ever since, and made a couple of more films and contemplated even more than that. So we just became very involved, and I've over time gotten to know lots of his sources, and we have lots of mutual friends. So but I just thought also something you see, I think if you've seen it, he's a good character for a film. he's not dull. So it was a very obvious choice, and more importantly, I think that the things that he's committed to examining and uncovering coincide with my own feelings about the world, which you've been alluding to right now.
Speaking of sources, throughout the film, Cy's reticence to engage in the project was evident.
Yeah.
And some of the most compelling scenes are where he communicates with you and Laura, who are off camera, about, okay, it's over, I'm done, I don't want to do any more. Those sorts of what was it like working with him over the course of this project? And did you have to kind of talk him off the ledge and bring him back? Because it was really compelling to see that.
Well, bear in mind a couple of things. Cy was enormously generous with his time to Laura and I and the whole film crew. So we filmed, I think the number could be 42 different occasions with him. So we kind of worn out our welcome at some point, And it didn't surprise me that he was kind of fed up with the process. The quitting moment in this was quite late in our tenure in his office. So I think, and he was tired. So, but I think that Cy, as he says, he comes back, he says, I committed to this thing and I'm gonna do it. So it was a moment, he had a moment, and but he was committed to finishing this project and seeing it out, and he did. So it was sort of in keeping with his volatility, if you will. But I never doubted, and I'm sure Laura didn't either, that he was going to come back and sit in that seat and finish the interviews.
It's such a beautifully made film, and I'd like to ask you a little bit about Cy's process and journey.
Sure.
Behind the groundbreaking reporting. But in your stylistic choices in the movie, the incredible use of archival footage, that to the camera work of Cy and his notebooks. Tell us about your approach and your collaboration. And I want to mention Olivia Streisand and your cinematographer and your DP, Mia Chiaffi-Henry as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, I certainly appreciate your generous comments. The archival component of this is critical, and I've made a lot of films that use archival footage, and I've never encountered material like this that was gathered by Olivia. Olivia Streisand was our archival producer. She's a full producer on this film, and deservedly so. She found materials that I think, speaking for myself, I assume for Laura as well, we were just amazed by. How in the world could you dig that deep and find that material? She also, and this is really important, she also took on the task of organizing Cy's chaotic archive, if you will. I think archive's a generous word. It's not quite that. But she made it an archive, I think. And so we were able, while shooting, the setup that we had, and it was quite novel, and we shot in one room, or two rooms actually. There was another room adjacent to his offices, which we commandeered, and in that we spread all of his files, I should say, Olivia and others, spread the files all over and organized them. So we were able to do interviews with Cy, with our 3 cameras that the wonderful Mia Chiaffi-Henry had established, set up, and she was able to listen to us and Olivia and say, hey, I found a file or some notes that relate to what you're talking about, and bring them into the room and use them to inform the interview or prod Cy in some way. It's a very unusual setup, and hats off to Olivia for making this all possible. I don't think we could have possibly made such a fine film without her extraordinary efforts.
In the film, Cy talks about his criticism kind of Pentagon reporters.
Yeah.
And the quote that he has is, what you have in America is not so much censorship, but self-censorship by the press.
Yeah.
With the recent criticism of CBS News and its new leader, Bari Weiss, who pulled the plug on a completed 60-minute story focused on the notorious El Salvador prison, Sicat, ostensibly to appease the preferences of the administration, that criticism of Cy kind of appears to ring true today. In your career, you've not been shy about covering social and political issues, from your work with ABC News and Peter Jennings to your work on Frontline. How are you seeing this dynamic of self-censorship unfold across the industry, and how, in your view, has it kind of affected the craft of journalism in America today?
Well, it suppresses reporting. The Barry Weiss situation at CBS is one thing, but going back to the Pentagon, so I was talking about the Pentagon. Now we have a situation at the Pentagon where people have to sign non-disclosure agreements to go and do any reporting about the Pentagon. It's completely inverted the purpose of the First Amendment, and I just think it's a chilling moment. Now, that said, as Sy observes, even back in the day, he viewed the people at the Pentagon during the Vietnam War as essentially stenographers for the brass, and I think that maybe it hasn't changed so much, but it's certainly now overt and it's now policy, and I think it's a chilling moment for any kind of source, and I often talk in these situations about Camille Losapio, who gave Sy the photographs from Abu Ghraib. It took enormous courage in that environment back, this is many years ago, but think of it now. Does a Camille want to come forward now with the kind of noise and intimidation that's talked about among in the administration? So I think it's a very difficult and dire moment, and I know people say it's always been that way, but I think it's worse. And there are sources who I'm familiar with who've been Sy's sources for years, and I think some of them, for example, General Taguba, would be undeterred. He's a hero in my opinion, and he's a prototypical Sy Hersh source, a principled guy, doesn't agree with Sy about a lot of things in terms of the military and all that, but he's an honest man, and he has principles. And there are a lot of people still like that, but boy, anyone on the margins is going to be intimidated by this administration, I think. It's a fact.
And not to give fodder to the kind of reasons to be intimidated, but as many folks in the audience may be aware, at the ACLU, we represent a group of journalists who were brutalized last summer as they were covering the protests here in Los Angeles. And the allegations are intentional use of pepper spray, tear gas, rubber bullets directed at journalists who were literally doing their jobs, documenting the widespread protests that resulted from the lawless ICE raids. Sy ends the document talking about the culture of enormous violence that we all live with. With that violence now being even more openly directed at reporters and bystanders, what do you think investigative journalists kind of today and tomorrow can learn from the courage of Sy's work? And what do you see as the future of investigative reporting in this environment?
Well, I think it's such a broad question, and the jury's out for sure. I don't really have an answer. I'm extremely worried about investigative journalism. I think it takes, even in the heyday of the Woodwards and Sys and all that, the Watergate era, even then it took courage and it took nerve to pursue these stories, because the institutions are structured to suppress your efforts. But I think as I say, I think it's worse now, and I think that there are Sy Hershes out there. There are people who have the energy and the commitment. I often cite Julie Brown, who's broken all the stories about Epstein, and there are plenty of others. But it's just a difficult time to find stories that have sources attached to them that are willing to talk, and I think that's just a reality right now. And I will say, circling back, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, going back to the Abu Ghraib story, Camille Losapio, the wonderful woman who gave Sy those photographs, we had an appearance with her in New York, and in Alice Tully Hall. There were thousands of people there, or over 1,000. And she was on the stage with us, which made us all very happy. And so at one point, a discussion, something akin to what we're having right now, happened, and I speculated that she might have, in this environment, not have the courage to come forward, and she indignant. Of course I would, you know. And so they're always Camille's, you know, and let's just hope they continue to have the commitment to the truth.
My last question is about fearlessness, and in addition to choosing Cy as a subject, you also personally chose Laura as your co-director, and Laura is someone who's been known to be a fearless documentarian.
Absolutely.
Her work on the Snowden documentary and a number of our other projects really put her personally at risk, and she's always kind of demonstrated that fearlessness in her filmmaking. So I'd love to ask you about your thought in collaborating with Laura and why it was such a, why you thought it would be a good kind of movie-making marriage to create this project together.
Well, I think it's very simple. We both had this feeling about the significance of Cy Hirsch. It's really that. It's basic, and of course she's a brilliant filmmaker. And of course I would want to collaborate with her. But we came together because we both are acutely aware of Cy's significance, but also I think acutely aware of what a unique kind of character he is, and that he would make a fine film, and a film that would resonate beyond just the profile, but suggest have a much larger meaning, which I think the film does now. It's kind of met its moment, if you will.
Indeed it did, absolutely. Well, with that, we're thrilled to open it up to the audience for some questions. In the back.
Hi, great to see you, Chandra, and thank you for being here. A couple things. One, I was pleasantly surprised to see the very specific and pointed shots fired in the New York Times. Two, I wonder, you were talking about journalists. What do you want young journalists and young people in general to take from this film, and how might you be engaging with young people as you do sessions, as you promote this film?
Well, let's take the second part of that. I hope that this film will have a life in journalism schools, certainly that. And actually, it's interesting, on a couple of occasions, there have been people as young as 8th graders who've come to screenings, and the teacher who was with one of them said, "Can we show this?" And I said, "It's on, it's on TV. You can stream it, and please use it in your classes." So I think that it's available. Let's put it that way. And so I think that it will be used in journalism schools pretty widely. I mean, it's pretty clear. We've heard from numbers of schools, and all of them very enthusiastic about the film and thinking there's a message as to how to be an investigative reporter, or what isn't. One of the things that really has amazed me a little bit throughout this process is there's reporting and there's investigative reporting, and a lot of people kind of they know about Woodward and Bernstein and so forth, but they don't really get that it's a process, and that there are risks involved, and that it requires a kind of unique commitment to the truth. So I think it's been enlightening for a lot of people, particularly young people, the role of investigative journalism in the present and historically. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
In the back over on the right.
So with the body of work of signing his storied past, I'm sure that there were issues, topics that you covered that just couldn't make it.
Indeed, yes, many.
So could you maybe tell us some of those, because there's so
Sure.
much.
I'm always anticipating that question, and then I forget about half of them. But there's some very prominent ones. I think the murder and capture and murder of bin Laden was a very big story that Cy did. And I only speaking for myself, but I think sort of history has sort of validated that story, or many aspects of it. And it was too big and to work into this narrative. And strangely enough, not that many people have asked about it, but to my mind, it was one of the larger ones. He did some extraordinary reporting, kind of relates to today, on Noriega. And not to say that it caused his fall, but it certainly had some role in it. And that was a remarkable set of stories, actually. Another one that I happen to love, and I'll hark back to the New York Times and this story, one of my all-time favorites, is he went upon joining the New York Times after the Watergate, going to Washington, going to New York, I should say, for the New York Times. He launched into an investigation of a person named Sidney Korshak, which maybe has a residence out here, a big mobster. Some people, actually Jeff Girth, the reporter who partnered with him on this reporting on Korshak, said he was the most powerful man in America. One could debate that, but I could make an argument for it if you'd like. But he was a big mobster, and it was a terrific expose in the New York Times. But the incredible part of that story is that the mob, which would be the Chicago mob, Korshak was a representative of the outfit, as they were called, they penetrated the New York Times. They found his travel records, his call logs, everything. They got somebody inside the New York Times to expose all of his information. It was a chilling moment, and he had to go back to one of his biggest sources in Chicago and say, hey, I'm sorry, but the cat's out of the bag. So there's stories like that, and you could make an entire half hour or hour at least on Watergate alone. The back and forth with Bob that's in here is the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more of that, and he wrote, I think, 40 stories on Watergate. Some of them, a couple of them groundbreaking, and one of them we allude to here. So there's lots of material, and there's a great deal of reporting, of course, about the Iraq War. I mean, he wrote many stories for the New Yorker about the war, and we mentioned one of them. You meet Taguba, but he wrote a wonderful profile of Taguba once he finally met him.
I'd like to ask, is there specific ways the public can help the ACLU or other bodies push back against the censorship that's happening with the administration?
Thank you for the question. I'll repeat it in case folks in the back didn't hear it. Are there ways to get involved with the ACLU or in the broader movement to kind of protect our First Amendment rights and fight censorship? And there absolutely are ways. We welcome your support, volunteering, financial support, engagement. There are ways to get involved in your local community. There are ways to, in your church or your university or institution that you might be affiliated with. On our website, there's a volunteer portal where you can engage. Our national office also has a number of know your rights kind of FAQs, frequently asked questions, that are like one-page documents on your rights if you're pulled over by an ICE officer, your rights around reproductive freedom, and just a whole range of issues that we hold dear. So certainly would recommend folks checking that out. But absolutely, and in this moment, I mean, honestly, this film is being broadcast in a moment of rising authoritarianism, where we're seeing our country slip closer and closer to what looks like Turkey or Hungary or Russia, and then anything that we've been familiar with before. And the antidote to authoritarianism is an engaged citizenry. It's 7 million people coming out in the streets for the No Kings rally. It's people learning, engaging with their local government, local officials, and being aware of what's happening and protesting and supporting a movement for popular democracy. So no matter what your field is, whatever skill set you have, whether you're an artist or a storyteller, poet, musician, lawyer, tech person, there's ways that you can contribute to fighting to retain some shred of democracy in our country. And I am confident in the long run that we will prevail, but it's going to really require a lot of us to roll up our sleeves and get involved. So thank you for that great question.
I want to, I don't know where we're at in this, but I do want to add one note to all this. When you make films like this, you do it because you want change and because you want people, first of all, you want people to see it. And I think that it's incredibly significant that Netflix has chosen this film and is supporting it so energetically at this time. And I think that we have to acknowledge that. That's Netflix over there. It's just something that I know every single person who worked on this film is just so appreciative and so aware of the efforts that are going into promoting the film and getting people to see it. It's going to be in already is in many countries, in many languages. So it's an international film, and it's exactly what we dreamed would happen with our film, and lo and behold, it has.
I think we have time for one more question before we wrap. In the middle, sir.
Yeah, the moment when she commented on, or I guess the question was asked, would this story exist without the photographs?
Without photographs.
Yeah, and you said no. And the immediate thought I had was about AI, and I was wondering if that came up in the conversation, so that things could be fabricated, and what that does to journalism.
It did not. I mean, we certainly are very aware of that. We didn't talk about it particularly, but it's something that just looms over any discussion of the truth, and so it informed us in indirect ways. I don't think Cy has a lot of points of view on it. I don't think he's that immersed in AI and its significance. I think the way perhaps others are, certainly people here, me. But it's just an immensely concerning fact that you can fabricate the truth or fake the truth or whatever you want to call it. And I think that it's too early to judge what the significance of AI will be on journalism, but it's so far as I can see it can't be good. There are no gatekeepers for the truth anymore. One of the things that is so apparent to someone like me, who lived at the time of the Vietnam War, at that time there were 3 television networks and three or 4 newspapers that were the papers of record, kind of gatekeepers for the truth, and people acknowledged that with all of their imperfections, the New York Times included, eventually things came out that moved the needle politically. And I don't see that right now, and so I'm very concerned, but I really don't have an answer, or not that you expect me to have one, but I'm just only elucidating my own concerns.
I'll just close with a few words of thanks. Firstly, Liv and Netflix, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mark and Laura and Absentia, thank you so much for this wonderful contribution, piece of art that will live on and
Thank you very much, and
teach
thank you
future
so much for
generations.
coming.